So welcome everybody to the inaugural session of POSI PG Gurukul. Uh, I would request Dr. Dhiren Ganjwala, who is the president of POSI, to talk to us about this concept um, and start the proceedings.
Yes, thank you, Taral. Good evening, Sadgurus, Gurus, Executive Committee members of Pediatric Orthopedic Society and the Shishyas. I welcome you to the inaugural session of POSI PG Gurukul, which is a new concept. And I would just brief you about why we decided to start this concept. The idea behind this concept is very simple. When you appear for the postgraduate examination, there are high chances that you will have a case, the long case or a short case, which is of pediatric orthopedics. And many times we have seen that you are not able to succeed well or pass the exam well because of a lack of knowledge. So that's the short-term aim of this course, that you can pass your exam well. The long-term aim is, if you imbibe this knowledge and apply that in your practice, then definitely we are sure that the children with an orthopedic problem will be benefited, and that will help society at large. So with that aim, we have started this session. Please share your feedback, suggestions to make it better, to make it more useful. Now I request our Secretary Sandeep to give a brief introduction about POSI and its activity. Thank you.
Thank you, Dhiren Bhai. So, at the outset, I think we should congratulate Venkat Das for the efforts that he has taken into making PG Gurukul, OC Gurukul activity a reality. And I'm sure that it is going to be useful to all the postgraduates so that they can, as you rightly pointed out, do well in their exams first and treat their children patients much better. So we have a concept where one person, which is Dr. Vidyasagar Chandankere today, who is going to teach the postgraduates about hip examination in children and highlight a few common conditions. And then you have two Mahagurus. You have Dr. Gopinath Menon and Dr. Anil Agarwal, who have been examiners, are examiners, and they can guide you after you ask your questions as to what is the correct answer or what is the correct approach that you should follow when presenting a particular case or a condition, so that you can get the best marks and clear your exams at the first attempt itself. So we will have a lot many more topics, and this will be a ongoing activity with every time a new presenter and new mahagurus to help you out with your exam preparation. And in addition to that, POSI has been doing super specialty webinars for practicing orthopedic surgeons and pediatric orthopedic surgeons. So all the best to POSI, Venkat Das, and I think we should start this meeting. Thank you very much.
Yes, Venkat. Yeah.
Can I proceed?
Yeah, please.
Yeah. So good evening, all the members of the Executive Committee of POSI, and a warm welcome to all the postgraduates who have shown interest and have logged in for this POSI PG Gurukul session. And I would like to thank Dr. Dhiren, who gave me this opportunity to lead this project called POSI Gurukul. And I think Dr. Dhiren and Sandeep have told enough about that. So we have Dr. Vidyasagar as our guru today. He is a pediatric orthopedic surgeon practicing at Sunshine Hospital in Hyderabad. And he's going to talk to us about examination of the pediatric hip, which is one of the most important topics. So as you all know, as postgraduates, pediatric orthopedic cases is one of the common cases. So even I remember when I was doing my post-graduation, they used to say that 100% you will get a case from pediatric orthopedics. And it turned out that in my exam, out of the 4, we had 1 long case and 3 short cases, and I had 2 pediatric orthopedic cases. Where I went for a DNB exam in CMC Vellore, where Professor Risha Madri was the examiner, and of 4 cases, out of 3 out of the 4 cases were pediatric orthopedic cases. So I'm sure that the scenario has not changed. Even now, it's a very common pediatric orthopedic cases are very commonly kept in your exams, and it is important for you to have a very clear idea about the concepts which keeps evolving in pediatric orthopedics. And as we have Dr. Gobinath Menon from SRMC Chennai and Dr. Anil Agarwal from CNBC Hospital in New Delhi, both of them are very experienced regular examiners who is going to help you to teach you the tips and tricks, the common questions which is asked pertaining to hip examination in a pediatric hip case. So I request all of you to make use of this opportunity. Don't think like this is an exam. This is a very good opportunity for you to clarify all your doubts. We have given a WhatsApp number. Send all your questions to the WhatsApp number, which can be answered. And please feel free to interact. Without any further delay, I will ask Dr. Vidyasagar to take over. Over to you, Vidya.
Thank you, Dr. Venkat. Very good evening and welcome to all the OC executive members. I'll start my presentation by sharing my screen. I hope you are able to see my screen now.
Yes, we can see it very well with this.
Yeah, so welcome all to first POSI Gurukul. I'll be talking about pediatric hip examination and hip related cases now. And I would like to thank my gurus, Dr. M.V. Reddy and Dr. J.K. Reddy. So most commonly in exams, these are the common cases which are being kept. So TDH, Perthes hip, skiffy, arthritic hip, then Coxa-Vara, Tom Smith arthritis, and ankylosis. There can be various combinations. Today, what we will discuss is classic cases, how they present, but there can be variations. You must remember, depending upon the age group when the child presents, or depending upon the intervention which might be already done in the child. So it's important to get to the diagnosis, and it includes history and then relevant history pertaining, and then doing the proper examination to exclude some of the things or to take new points, and then relevant investigations which will follow further. So always when we are examining children, I would like to examine their gait as soon as they enter the OPD, because sometimes they might not walk when you ask them to walk. And when examining children who are non-walking, it's better to examine in the mother's lap, make the child comfortable. When we examine hip cases, it's good to examine from expose from abdomen to the lower limbs and just cover the private parts so that we are not making them uncomfortable. Good illumination is necessary, and it's good to explain to the parent or the child who is older that what you are going to do and what we are expecting. And whenever we are looking at for tenderness, always it's good to look at the face of the child or wincing. So I'll just start with a case story. Here is a 4-month child who was premature born, and he was in NICU for a month. And then since last 3 days, the child has been having continuous fever, and the mother says that the child is keeping the right hip flexed, and the child always cries on changing the diaper. And it's the right hip which we are talking about. And I'll play the video to show. When I pull the left leg, the child is comfortable, but when I touch that, you can see the child starts wincing. And then I'm rotating the hip joint and checking. Left side is absolutely normal, and the child doesn't allow me to do anything at all. So if we can ask some of the PGs what they think the problem could be till now, and then we will go for further examination.
So it appears to be a synovitis, a transient synovitis.
Right.
Which is having appears to be a transient synovitis of the hip, and the child is keeping the hip flexed to accommodate for the joint effusion.
Okay, is transient synovitis common in a non-walking child, especially when child has these symptoms of fever and? things?
Sir, second maybe Tom Smith arthritis, septic arthritis of hip.
Okay. Any other things you should consider if we take out the fever thing? Okay, I'll give you
We
4
should add-
clues here.
We can ask whether the child was admitted for neonatal sepsis in the NICU.
Yeah, so that's the history is that the child was admitted. So I'll give you 4 clues, and could it be femur osteomyelitis?
Cause pain in the hip extension, sir.
Sorry, I am not able to hear you.
Osteomyelitis will not cause pain on hip extension, sir.
Correct. So the hip range of motion is very important when we are suspecting anything related to septic, especially hip. And I have included neck of femur fracture here because if you have a child who has been just delivered a traumatic, difficult delivery, still they can have this neck of femur fracture. That's why it is there. So that history is very relevant. And DDH, we all know it's a painless condition. So this is unlikely in the given scenario and history. So I'll go on for clinical examination. The inspection finding shows the right hip is flexed and abducted. There is some femoral triangle fullness and there is swelling noted. There is local rise of temperature on palpation and there is joint line tenderness. Superficial lymph node, the horizontal groups are palpated here, which compared to the other side. So now I think the signs are more clear towards septic hip, the local rise of temperature and everything. Movement wise, there is pseudo paralysis and there is painful range of motion when you elicit any passive motion. But one more the problem what I noticed is the child is having shortening. So can septic hip account for shortening? Yeah.
So usually
It stages it will cause.
in such a young child, it won't cause shortening, but as a post-septic sequelae, it can cause shortening.
But if it is there now, what do you suspect then? A
Tom Smith
distended
arthritis.
joint.
Tom
Yeah,
Smith arthritis
sir,
could be it is a cause for a
Destruction
shortening,
of the femoral head.
correct. But the history wise, 2, 3 days, 4 days is very too early for the hip to be head to be resolved. So I think you should also
DDH?
suspect the hip can
DDH?
no the
Fracture
hip can
neck of the
sublux.
pin.
Hip
Yes, sir.
subluxation should be suspected because there is a lot of pressure
Yes,
there
sir.
and that pushes the head out. So that is the first thing with this scenario should come to your mind. The other things maybe in the next differential diagnosis you can keep in mind. So what investigation would we like to have here?
Ultrasonography of the hip, sir.
Why ultrasound? Why not X-ray?
Because head is mostly cartilaginous, so it may not give that idea about.
Correct. You
And,
can see the soft
UH
tissue things, what is going on, effusion in the joint, the head position. And if it is subluxed also you can see. But before coming to me, the patient has already got an X-ray. And this is the child's X-ray. Can one of the PGs read the X-ray? In neonates, it's difficult to get a symmetrical X-ray because the positioning and X-ray taking is difficult, exposure and all. So what do you think is going on in this? The affected side is right side.
So there is increased medial space.
Correct. There is a increased medial space. What else? Do you see any lytic area in the metaphysis of the proximal femur?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, so that is there. What else there is? If you draw those two lines, the H line and the P line, the right side appears to be the inferior lateral quadrant, right? As you say that there is some subluxation. So that's the reason there is shortening. And these are the investigations which will be required to get the further diagnosis. Complete blood picture, CRP, ultrasound both the hips, and then if possible, aspiration bedside, which should be quite diagnostic. So this is a classic history, but so in non-walking child, the parents usually come with what is obvious to a orthopedic surgeon, like a clip foot or a congenital knee dislocation or a vertical talus or a spinal problem which is seen. And the other common thing is a referral from a pediatrician. When the child presents with fever, pseudoparalysis, swelling and tenderness, they usually show their pediatrician and then they are referred. Very rarely we find very sharp parents where they can recognize the shortening and clicks. So it's important that you take the history of oligohydramnios, breech or family history of DDH if you suspect anything like a DDH. And then it is important to note history of prematurity, low birth weight, asphyxia, neonatal sepsis if you are suspecting there is a septic hip or an issue like that. And it's also important in cerebral palsy later on. And then trauma, especially the history which is inconsistent, you should suspect battered baby syndrome. Probably a trivial trauma can also be something like osteogenesis imperfecta causing a fracture in the femur neck. It's again rare. So coming to inspection in this age child, you should look for the Scarpa's triangle, any fullness is there, any swelling, any erythema which is seen, and you should look for the groin fold, whether they are symmetrical medially or asymmetrical. Posteriorly, you can look for the symmetry of the gluteal folds and then any swelling in the gluteal area. It is quite obvious posteriorly. This child, the one which I had shown, after a year he presented, you can see the scar on the right side hip, there is a scar. And if you see, there is also a asymmetrical fold on the right side, that's the line. And see the level of patella, it's altered. So hip joint which has gone for Tom Smith or the hip has already dislocated, the sequelae you can see here. Other thing what you should notice medially is sometimes when there is restricted abduction, you see this prominent adductor tendon. Posteriorly, you look for spinal bifida occulta and those signs. In a small non-walking child, tape measurement is difficult. This is a simple test. You flex both the hip and knee to 90-90 and see the level of knee if there is any difference, which will indicate any femoral shortening. And when you put in prone, you see the position of the foot, which can indicate tibia or the foot included shortening. Here the right side foot is having good arch. The left side you see there is a convex border, so that's a vertical talus, and this is a congenital knee dislocation which is commonly associated with hip. So you should look for hip problems if the child has this. And now these are classic tests which are described for DDH. The first test is Barlow, which is a provocative maneuver. And what we do here is we bring the hip from abduction to adduction, and while doing that we apply a posterior pressure and we try to push the head out and laterally. That's the maneuver, so as to provoke the hip to go out, so to know as the instability. And on the other side is the Ottoloni test, which is a reduction maneuver. That is, we bring the hip from adduction to abduction and putting pressure over the trochanter and pulling the femur simultaneously, so that to reduce the hip which is already dislocated. So these two hip tests are good to do in a child who is less than 6 months. As the age grows, the soft tissue tightness won't allow, and probably there is no much significance to these tests at an older age group. So this is a test where it is positive. You can see the hip is going out and it reduces. You can see the sudden. So more than the sound, the feel is important. The clunk is more important than the click here. And then a little bit older child, you can do the Galizet test, flex the hips to about 45 and knee to about 90 and put the foot at same level, same position, and see the level of the knees. And if they are different, that suggests again shortening. Classically, this test was described for screening for DDH, but it can be positive in many other things where there is femur or the tibia shortening. And this is another test where the bilateral DDH can be detected through this. The finger index is kept over the ASIS and the thumb is kept over the GT, just like our Schumacher's line. And then normally that line should be at the level of umbilicus or higher, but In case of dislocation, it is lower. This test is also described for DDH, but it can be positive anywhere where there is supratrochanteric shortening, like in congenital Coxa vara or PFFD without a femoral head. This is a classic telescopy test which is described, which is positive in DDH or Tom Smith arthritis or maybe Girdlestone where the head is not there. So in this, we keep the hip and knee flexed to 90-90, and then we put our thumb on the ASIS and other fingers on the GT and look for the movement between the thumb and the other fingers. If it is positive, it indicates that your telescopy is positive and the hip is unstable. Excuse me, a little bit I am having issues with moving the slide forward. We'll see. So in a non-walking child, you should suspect these three things. Congenital, most common is DDH. Rarely there can be congenital Coxa vara and PFFT. In the other two cases, you should look for other musculoskeletal anomalies also. And then in infection, there could be septic, which is common, and osteomyelitis. Involvement of the joint is indicated by the reduced range of motion or a painful range of motion, which is important. And then finally, trauma, a neck or femur fracture or a pathological fracture or a battered baby should be suspected. In a walking child, it's totally different. We have a relevant history where the parents are the informants. Antenatal history, it is important to know whether the mother has been having any medications which can lead to phocomelia or oligohydramnias where DDH and clubfoot are common. And in birth history, it's important to know prematurity, low birth weight, asphyxia, neonatal sepsis for septic arthritis, and breach for again DDH. In the past history, important to know the delayed milestones as in cerebral palsy, any persistent cough, weight loss, blood in sputum, which is indicative of tuberculosis. And medical history, you should ask for history of seizure medications, which can cause osteomalacia, and then neck or femur fracture secondary to that, and then asthma related to the steroid use, anti-tubercular therapy, any previous hip surgeries, and then any history of sickle cell. And in personal history, it's good to ask for any recent viral illness, which is common in transient synovitis, any appetite loss in tuberculosis or chronic conditions, and in bowel and bladder involvement, as in spinal cases like spinal meningomyelocele and others. So most of the hip cases present with these two symptoms, limp and pain. So there are a lot of things interplay which can happen between limp and pain. So other relevant symptoms can be fever and swelling as in septic arthritis. Inability to bear weight is suggestive of unstable SCFE. There is a spelling mistake there. It's unstable SCFE or septic arthritis. Difficulty in squatting, sitting, and walking can be happen where the child has a deformed femoral head or irritation in the hip joint. Deformity can happen in chronic arthritis or in idiopathic chondrolysis hip, which can also present as stiffness. So always we want to know whether it's acute or a chronic onset, the duration, and whether it's been improving day by day or worsening day by day, and chronology. Chronology, it's important, like a pain followed by swelling most likely is an infectious pathology, and a swelling followed by pain could be malignancy, which is turning out slowly. In pain, you should look at all these things: the location, onset, duration, progression, character, any radiation or referral, and then night cries, especially when you are suspecting tuberculosis, which is seen in children, and any aggravating factors or relieving factors. Any child with knee pain, the hip must be examined because of the referral of hip pain to the knee. So here I have made little combinations of pain where you can get to some conclusion in the history itself. Acute onset pain with a limp, no systemic features, transient synovitis is possible. Acute onset pain, fever and pseudoparalysis, you must consider septic hip or osteomyelitis. Acute onset pain, trauma, not walking, fracture and SCFE is possible, unstable. And then chronic pain with limited range of motion, arthritis. Morning pain, which is better later on in the day, it's a juvenile rheumatoid arthritis. In limp and pain combination, painless limb can present in DDH, sequelae of Tom Smith arthritis, Coxa vara, and late probably middle Perthes. And painful limb can be there in synovitis hip and SCIFI. So 3 things are important when you summarize your history: the age of the child and what are the chief complaints, and regarding the chief complaints, what relevant history you have taken. So based on this thing, you can come to these conclusions: acute or chronic, it's a congenital or acquired, trauma or non-trauma, infectious or non-infectious, it's inflammatory or non-inflammatory. And then you can have 1 or 2 or 3 differential diagnoses at this point in your mind, which you are going to rule out or conclude in your further examination. So this is the classic pattern of examination I follow, and I have been taught like this. First is the gait. Some people do the gait thing at the end, but I like it to describe the gait first. Then examination in standing, then supine, inspection, palpation, movements, measurements, and special tests. So here is a 5-year-old child who is limping on the right side. Can any of the PGs describe the gait pattern? What gait would you like to call it?
It's limping and lurching to the same side of but the right side, sir, looking like an Trendelenburg gait.
Correct. So the child is limping and lurching towards the same side. So that's a classic Trendelenburg gait. So when I give you 5-year-old child with a Trendelenburg gait, what should come to your mind? What are the possibilities we have here? It's definitely not painful. She doesn't have any antalgic gait there. So painless gait. Perthes is one. Any other thing?
DDH, sir.
Fine.
DDH.
Neglected DDH. Anything else?
Coxa vara.
Yeah, Coxa vara. So these 3 which are painless, and the age group also fits. If nothing has been done previously, I think that should come to our mind. So if I twist and turn the history a little bit, there is a history of breach and oligohydramnios in the same girl, and she is limping since the walking age, let's say, and it's a painless limp. What do you think now?
DDH, sir.
DDH.
DDH and PFFD, proximal femoral deficiency.
Yeah, so that's congenital Coxa vara is still possible, right? It's a painless limp, and the child has been limping since walking age. So I twist the history a little bit more, and child has a viral fever 1 week back. She's limping. She has an antalgic gait. Now, what do you think?
So transient synovitis of it.
Transient synovitis.
Correct. So that thing should be one thing. I should have a septic arthritis also in back of your mind. Another little history I'll twist. Child had a trivial fall 4 or 5 months back and is limping since 4 or 5 months. Now she has a classic this Trendelenburg gait. What you have already described, it fits into Perthes mostly. SCIFI is not common at that age. So this is a boy. See him walking, 14-year-old boy limping since 2 months. He had a trivial slip and fall. Can anyone describe the gait? Please describe the gait. Is it painful or not?
Painful, sir.
So it's
Decreased at
antalgic
short
gait.
and stand stage.
Painful.
Correct. Can you note the foot progression angle there?
Yes, sir.
It is internal rotating.
See properly
Increased
whether
foot
Increased
foot progression.
it's internal or external.
Internal.
Correct.
External.
And you can see the right pelvis. Is it high? Does it look high or low?
Yes, high, sir.
High. So likely
Looks
adduction
high.
deformity should come to your mind immediately. So now I'll come to standing inspection. You look at the shoulder levels, you look at the pelvis level where they are symmetrical. Back, you look at the spine. If you find any scoliosis, you need to mention. And from the lateral side, you look at the lumbar lordosis, whether it's exaggerated or it's normal. Coming to local examination per se of the hip, first thing what you describe when the patient is supine is the attitude of the patient, how the resting position of the patient and the limb is. If there is any lordosis, you can mention here. They say you examine the child on the hard couch, but I do it on a firm couch. Hard can sometimes be really tough and painful, but the exam answer is hard couch. And then you look at the rotations and the flexion or extension at hip and knee and describe them here. So once it is done, you can see the patellar level and comment on the limb length discrepancy shortly, which is apparent. And then you can also see the muscle wasting and comment there. And then next comes hip proper examination. If you can see the ASIS, you mention it and look at both the ASIS. First the normal, then the abnormal side. And then look at the Scarpa's triangle for any scars, sinuses, any fullness, any erythema. And look at the quadriceps wasting, which you can see anteriorly itself. And then laterally, you look at the trochanteric prominence and the supratrochanteric hollow. And posteriorly, can you, tell me what is the number 8 there? Any of the PGs? What is
Dimple
8?
of Venus.
Correct. So
Dimple of Venus corresponding to SI joint.
Yeah. So just above that and medial would be your PSIS. And then 7
PSIS.
represents the gluteal atrophy. You need to see any swelling in the gluteal area. And 6 is the symmetrical gluteal folds. And with this, I think inspection will be over, and then you come for palpation. In palpation, first thing I do is palpate and identify the ASIS. Now there are two techniques. One is to go from distal to proximal till you feel the bony point, or you palpate the iliac crest and come anteriorly till the bony dip is there. And you mark the ASIS and then compare the levels on both the sides. And then next thing is you check for local rise of temperature in the Scarpa's triangle, any tenderness there, any swelling if it is there, and look for the femoral pulse on both the sides and see the symmetry, whether the pulse is well felt on both the sides or there is any difference. Now in adult, the classic teaching is marking the anterior joint line, which they say midinguinal point, a line from ASIS to the pubic symphysis, 2 centimeter below the midinguinal point and 2 centimeter below and lateral is the joint line. But in children, you can just palpate the pulse and then go 1 finger per lateral so that you won't be pressing on the femoral nerve and look for joint line tenderness. And next thing is lateral examination, where you look and identify the trochanter in that manner, which is shown. And then once you identify the trochanter, there are 4 things which you should look in the trochanter. One thing is position of the trochanter in relation to the ASIS. Second thing is thickening of the trochanter, which can be altered where there is a fracture which is extracapsular and which is united. And then you should look for tenderness of the trochanter, which is palpated in the anterior posterior direction. And another thing is look for thirst tenderness, which you push the trochanter and stabilize the opposite side and see, that is for the intra-articular pathology. And then posteriorly again, you look for any swelling in the gluteal area, any atrophy. And if there is swelling, you always elicit a transmitted movement, whether it is there with the femur or not, whether it's painful or not. And for the posterior joint line, which they describe as line joining the PSIS to the greater trochanter, a junction between lateral 1/3 and the medial 2/3. But in children, probably it's very small, and the description, this is enough if you want to elicit a joint line tenderness. And then you come to range of motion, and the first thing in range of motion would be to assess a fixed deformity. And what is a fixed deformity? If the limb can be brought to neutral in the axis of the movement, but further movement in the deformed direction is possible, that is a fixed deformity. So let's say the child has a fixed flexion deformity, so the limb can't be brought to neutral, but the further flexion is possible. So that is a definition of fixed deformity. It's because of muscle spasm, contractures, or ankylosis. You should look in all 3 planes, flexion and extension, adduction and abduction, and in rotations as well. And now, because you know the child had a lumbar lordosis, you need to do a Thomas test, which is done on a hard couch. Normally, the spine accommodates only your knuckles and never goes past that. But if you find the lordosis, you flex the normal hip till your lumbar lordosis is obliterated, and you look for the angle between the thigh and the table. That's the angle of FFD, which represents the masking which has been done or through compensation at the spine. So in a child with a bilateral hip pathology, it may be difficult to do Thomas, because you can't do Thomas test with the child has both the hips which are deformed or affected, or when there is a knee extension contracture, or when it is painful. So this is a child who has bilateral hip FFD. So you can see the lumbar lordosis, but the child knee is dropping below the table there, and hip seems to be an extension, but what you do is you flex the one hip at just to enough to obliterate the lumbar lordosis, and you need not take it to the chest totally, and you can ask the child to hold it, and whatever angle the other thigh makes with the table, that is your angle of FFD. And same thing you can repeat on the other side easily. This maneuver is easy to perform. However, the classic described thing is in the prone position, which is little difficult, I felt, to do in the younger kids. The older 10 plus kids may cooperate and do this thing easily, but you can try this as well. Then once you know the fixed deformities, you look for further range of motion. Always describe the active range of motion first and then passive. Describe whether they are painful or painless. If they are painful, when they are painful, throughout the motion or at the end of motion is important. And then measure in all the three planes. So this is a child. The first thing also I do here is a log roll test, simple, to see the for any intra-articular thing. If they don't allow you, you can test the foot and do this modified test where you appear to be examining the foot, but actually you are checking for the hip. And in an elderly child, you can see here, I am doing the log roll test. Yeah. So in range of motion also, you can get a variety of things. If the child is having near full range of motion with terminal pain and limitation, synovitis should be considered. Gross limitation of range of motion with pain, arthritis. No movement at all, no pain, bony ankylosis. If they have jog of movement with pain, consider fibrous ankylosis or a chondrolysis hip. And then if they have exaggerated movement in all plane except abduction, which is limited, TDH should come to your mind, because in coxa vara here, congenital coxa vara, abduction and internal rotation both are limited, and other movements also may be affected because of the narrow impingement of the neck over the acetabulum. When there is a change of arc, that is external rotation is more than internal rotation, it could be a retroverted femur. When the internal rotation is more than external rotation, anteversion should be considered. When there is axis deviation, that is limb goes in obligatory external rotation when you are flexing, then it is could be skiffy, which is classic, and it can be there in other also where the head is deformed. When there is adduction more than abduction and there is a change of arc, Perthes and coxa vara is also possible. When all the movements are exaggerated, Girdlestone and Tom Smith arthritis should be considered. So that's a combination you have to look for now. Once you take the history, you should see these things, and you see for flexion and extension and then rotations in the prone. That's also a Craig test which we do. And then this child, I want you to comment on the posture now. Anybody can comment, please. I'll start the video, just comment at the posture now where I've paused it. Anybody is there?
Heel not touching, sir. Right heel is not touching to the ground.
She is in the stance now. I want you to look at the patella and look at the foot rotations. That's the thing which
Intoing is there, right side, sir. But squinting of the patella.
Left side is intoing, sir.
Sorry. Left side intoing, sorry.
Yeah, but if you see, there is no squinting of patella. Both the knee joint is facing you directly.
Tibial intorsion could be present, sir.
Yeah, so what do you do is
tibial intorsion.
You put the child prone, do the Craig test for the femur anteversion. That is, in 1990 knee flexion, you external rotate the hip till the trochanter becomes most prominent laterally, and that line from the central to the line of that limb would be your anteversion. If that is symmetrical, then you look for thigh foot angle. This is the thigh angle and this is the foot angle. And you see the heel bisector perfectly cuts the thing. So there is no foot deformity here. So most probably it's coming from the tibia. In measurements, you should take the length measurement and the girth as well. And in the same position, the first thing what we measure is the apparent length, which indicates the compensatory mechanisms which have already taken place. So that length is measured from the xephisternum or the sternal notch till the tip of the medial malleolus on both the sides. There is no need to do any squaring of the pelvis here. And next thing you do is you square the pelvis, bring the ASIS to the same level both. If there is a adduction deformity, ASIS is higher, so you adduct the limb further and square the pelvis. If there is abduction deformity where the ASIS is lower, you abduct the limb further and bring the ASIS to the same level. And when you are measuring after squaring the pelvis, you put the normal side in the same position as the deformed side, and you measure for the length. So total length is measured from again ASIS to tip of the malleolus. It helps if you mark the lines before only. Mark the joint line, mark the medial malleus, so that you need not palpate it again and again and waste time there. And can anybody, any PGs tell me why do you need to square the pelvis here when you are taking the true measurement? Hello?
To remove the pelvic obliquity.
Mask the deformity.
Okay, but that's why you are doing apparent and true measurement. No? Apparent and true shows anything which is there in the spine, if anything is there coming from the pelvis. But why do you need to square the pelvis?
To hinder the compensation done by the body for leg length discrepancy.
Yeah,
To
so
identify
that compensation is seen
to
in
identify the bony shortening, sir. To identify the amount of bony shortening present.
Then what happens in apparent measurement? That's also bony landmark we are measuring, no? So the
So
actual
in apparent lengthening, we are not obliterating the compensations done by the body for limb length discrepancy.
Yeah.
Sir, as such, if there is a abduction deformity, the pelvis is already drooped to that side. So we are not taking that into consideration when we are making taking the apparent length. But when we are taking the true length, we want to remove the pelvic obliquity and compensation, and then we measure the true length, sir.
Correct. The pelvis and the spine is, let's say, it's a mobile unit, but it affects your compensation or apparent measurement. The reason why you square that pelvis in true measurement is different. See, you take the measurement from the ASIS to the medial malleus, but actually you are trying to measure the length of the limb, which is from the hip joint. And there is no bony point or bony center for the hip. And you know, if the center of the hip is different, but your measurement point is different. That's why in abduction and adductions, your measurement can change. So in abduction, the length is shortened actually, and in abduction, the length can be more. That is the reason you square the pelvis so as to bring both the hips in a symmetrical position. And then you do the segmental measurement from the ASIS to the medial joint line and the medial joint line to the tibial segment. All the hip pathologies, usually the shortening is in the supratrochanteric area, and sometimes you can get a congenital short femur also associated with the coxa vara, where the femur length also can be affected, or PFFD, it can have fibular hemimelia and shortening can be there in the tibial segment also. The other thing is measuring the Byron's triangle in the supine position. You drop a line from the ASIS perpendicular to the ground, and you drop a line from the tip of the GT perpendicular to that line. That would be the base of the triangle. In adults, it is usually 3 to 4 centimeter, but I think 2 to 2.5 centimeter, depending upon the age of the child, it can vary. So that base is important for knowing any supratrochanteric shortening. And if the both hip pathology is there, like in bilateral DDH or bilateral arthritic conditions, it won't have any relevance. Then you have to take the Knelton's line or some other line. So then classic Tenderberg test we want to elicit here. So the prerequisites you should know that the child should be able to stand for 30 seconds. The child should have a good coordination, not a case of cerebral ataxia, and then should be able to understand and obey commands what you want to do perfectly. And there should be no coronal plane deformity. And in the first image, bipedal stance, it shows that both hips are symmetrical and the child is having both foot on the ground. But here the affected hip is the left side. When I ask the patient or the child to stand on the right side, you know the left side is lifting up, the pelvis is lifting up. That means the right side abductor mechanism is doing good job to hold the center of gravity in a balanced position. But when the child, I ask him to stand on the affected limb, it is unable to lift the pelvis, and the other side pelvis, you can see there is a droop. So classic Trendelenburg is described always from the behind, and if you can even remove the knickers and see the posterior dimple of Venus, that is also fine here. So this represents overall abductor mechanism function. That includes the abductor power, the liver, which is the neck of femur, and the fulcrum. Fulcrum is gone in DDH, the liver is gone in non-union or Coxa vara or PF50, and abductor power is gone in polio or other conditions where the muscle weakness is possible. Then in an older child, you can do telescopy in this maneuver. Flex the hip 45 and knee 90, sit on that, and then palpate your SIS GT and then push the femur. In obese and little bit longer kids, you can do this rather than the classical 90-90 technique. And you all know the lines. I'll not go detail into that. This is the Kotari line, central plumb line, line joining the SIS, and perpendicular to that. If the perpendicular angle is higher, adduction deformity. If it's lower, it's adduction deformity. Schumacher is similar to our Klissik. And then Nelton's line is important in bilateral DDH or where we have bilateral pathology. Normally, the line from the ischial tuberosity to the ASIS should cut the GT, or the line should be above the GT. So if it is GT is above, then there is some shortening there. Then the kinase line which converges on the pathological side. And now we'll go on with some case examples. This we already know that we discussed transient synovitis. Other classical finding which will fit there is joint line tenderness is there. There is no lymph nodes, no limb line discrepancy, good range of motion, but terminally painful, which fits exactly into that picture. Now, another girl, 5-year-old, progressive limping since 1 year. There is no pain, and there is Trendelenburg gait. And other history is not there. There is no history of childhood infection. Now we have finished the examination. I think we are going for case. So maybe our Sadhgurus also can come in picture now along with the postgraduates.
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
Yes, sir.
This is Venkat here. Thank you for the good lecture.
Thank you.
I think we should now select the pages for the discussion.
Yes.
Can I request Dr. Anupam and Dr. Jagani are already there, and they can unmute themselves and switch on their video. And I call upon Nikhil. Dr. Nikhil, are you there? Dr. Ranjit and Dr. Siddharth Kamath. So these 5 can unmute yourself and get involved in the interactive session. So Vidya, you can pick one of these guys and ask questions so that multiple people doesn't give answers at the same time. You choose one of them and then ask questions.
Okay. Anupam, are you able to hear me?
Yes, sir. I'm able to hear you, sir.
Yeah. Tell me, this 5-year-old girl who has a progressive limp since 1 year, there is no pain, and child has a Trendelenburg gait. What thing would you like to ask in the history?
Trauma.
The differentials in the history.
Do you want to ask anything else?
The differential is for Perthes disease, actually. Differential diagnosis.
Okay.
Can ask for any history of fever also, because initially tuberculosis of the hip can also present with a painless limb. However, it won't be of 1 year duration.
Okay. So this child is absolutely no pain is there. There is no pain there. There is no history of tuberculosis, no history which is suggestive of septic arthritis, no history of surgical intervention.
You should also ask how the activities of daily living have been altered, whether she can squat or whether she can sit cross-legged.
Yeah. So the child has difficulty doing that. Child has difficulty sitting cross-legged. Any other thing you want to ask? Would you like to ask if there was a shortening at birth, which was there, or they have not noticed at all?
Shortening at the time of birth, then in that case the child would have limped since the beginning of her walking. But in this case, the child has started the limp has been noticed just before 1 year. Before that,
Correct.
she was walking normally.
So that shortening at birth would be important for DDH and for congenital coxa vara. But a child which is just limping since last 1 year and that is a progressive limp, I think you should. Do you want to know anything in examination? I'll give you the examination points here. So on inspection, the pulse is well felt on both the sides and palpation. There is no swelling or any scars or sinuses. On palpation, the trochanter on the affected side is high and there is shortening of 2 centimeters. There is a limitation of abduction and interrotation. And when I do the telescopy, it is negative.
So restriction of abduction and internal rotation is suggestive of Perthes, and we should also see for the sectoral sign. It is whether there is any differential rotation with the hip in extension and with the hip in 90 degrees of flexion. So two measurements should be taken.
Okay.
Two measurements by shortening of 2 centimeters.
Do you get 2 centimeter shortening early in Perthes in this girl? What's the expected shortening? Usually say they are minimal shortening, no, in Perthes. And is there a progressive limp in Perthes? Our Sadgurus, I think they can come and ask some questions here.
Yeah. Dr.
Collapse,
Agrawal is.
Gopinath sir, you can ask some questions.
Okay. And now, from these examination findings that he has given, it's obviously one thing which is it's not painful. Second thing is the head is in position because the telescopy, the pulse is and the sign of nav death is negative. Trochanteric is high, of course. Shortening is there, and abduction is decreased and internal rotation is also limited. Telescope is negative. Now all these findings are in favor of a coxa vara situation. So in this condition, I think you should always think in terms of a coxa vara as a possibility in this child. So with this findings, I think coxa vara should be the one which is to be thought of.
Yeah, Anupam, your diagnosis
Yes,
of Perthes is a etiological diagnosis. So we are thinking about what is the anatomical diagnosis here. Right, restriction of abduction and rotation is seen in coxa vara. Coxa vara can be due to many causes, and as Professor Gopinath Menon is suggesting, congenital coxa vara is one thing which you should think when you get this sort of findings. Vidyasagar, you can proceed.
So the important thing here is the progressive limp. Usually the limp is not progressive unless there is shortening, and in a 5-year-old girl 2 centimeter shortening with Perthes is probably not likely. The second thing is there is no pain at all in the hip. Perthes at any point, unless the hip heals, there is always some tenderness in the hip joint. So here she is absolutely no tenderness is there. So this is the X-ray. Can anyone read the X-rays? And I think the points and all our Sadhguru
Dr. Jagani, you can
Anil sir can.
X-ray. Dr. Jagani.
Yes, sir.
Can you read the X-ray?
This is the X-ray of the pelvis with both hip of the immature skeleton, with showing the right side there is a displacement of the femoral metaphysis. And the sentence line is also broken, sir.
Gopi sir and Anil sir, I would like
Yes.
you to come and guide the
Ah,
PGs.
yeah. Now this X-ray classically is showing a coxavara, and with that small fragment which is there near the neck of the femur, it is very classical of a
Fair
developmental
spangle.
coxavara. So the features are of a
Fairbairn
developmental
spangle, sir.
coxavara, and I think so. The anatomical diagnosis would have been and should have been coxavara alone, not due to Perthes, and X-ray findings are in favor of that, and probably a developmental coxavara is the radiological diagnosis that you have to make. Here you have to draw the Hilgin-Renus line along with the epiphyseal lines to see the degree of coxavara. For that, you have to draw a line along the triradiate cartilage and one along the metaphysis at the epiphyseal line to see the HE angle, or what is known as the Hilgin-Renus epiphyseal angle. And based upon that, you decide the degree of coxavara. So this is definitely a developmental coxavara.
Okay.
Like to add that if you made
Dr.
a diagnosis. Hello.
Yeah, Dr. Agarwal, go ahead.
Yeah, I would urge the pages to basically recognize the condition and keep some differential diagnosis. Just don't fix your ideas on a Perthes. If go for other conditions, keep the other conditions in the differential diagnosis. Because if you fix your ideas on the Perthes, then you will always look for signs of Perthes. You will not think of other things. Like you have made anatomical diagnosis of coxavara. Now think of the conditions which have coxavara, and this developmental coxavara is one of them.
Yeah, so the coxavara can be either congenital or developmental or acquired. Acquired forms are many, like in fibrous dysplasia, osteogenesis imperfecta, a malunited fracture, a skiffy, even a Perthes can cause a coxavara later on. So I have chosen case and history which will show the classical presentation so as not to confuse any PGs. If they know the classic case, I think they can deviate and choose the other things after the symptoms or history fits into that. So can we go for the next case, Dr. Anil and Gopinath sir?
Yeah, please.
Yeah.
Dr. Anil, do you have some slides to be shown? You in the afternoon you were saying that you have some slides.
No, sir.
Okay.
Can I proceed now?
Yeah, Vidyasagar, go ahead.
Yeah. So this is again a 5-year same age girl, and first we'll see the gait, then I'll give you the history, and then you can. Any of the PGs can describe the gait again here.
So is Dr. Ranjit here online? Dr. Ranjit. Okay, Dr. Kamal Parida.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, go ahead and describe the gait.
Yeah, the patient is walking bipedal, unassisted, with left shoulder is dipping down, with normal heel to toe progression on left side. The shoulder is dipping. It's looking like looking like in short limb gait. Might be with an lurching and limping component to the same side. That might be we can put some Suraj and confirm whether it's Trendelberg along with short limb or not.
Dr. KP, is it painful or painless?
Sir, because of the dipping, it looked like to be shortened a bit, but I don't think it's painful, sir. It's painless only.
Yeah, so you see the stance, no? Stance is not
Yes,
at all shortened. Both sides, I think
Yes,
stance is same. So there
Yes,
is no this thing. So I give you the history now. Now you might not have breach and oligohydramnios in all the cases, but there is the history in the child. And the child has been limping since walking age. When the child first started walking, she's been limping. And now she has a classic Trendelenburg gait. Now what do you think is possible? Give some differential diagnosis so that you can exclude something in the when you go for inspection or palpation.
Sir, by the history of breach and oligohydramnios, it's more like looking like an DDH. Since
All right. Let's take out the breach and oligohydramnios. Anything else?
with the since walking is he is limping, and with he is having a Trendelenburg gait also. So I think it's more like an the anatomical diagnosis will be more like an Coxa-Vara, and that will be a congenital Coxa-Vara, sir. I think since walking is there.
I'll twist the history a little bit. The child had a hip which was drained in childhood, neonatal period, because of septic hip. What do you think now?
Then the etiological diagnosis can be of septic sequelae of the hip, and anatomical diagnosis will be Coxa-Vara, and that will be developmental Coxa-Vara. Sorry, not developmental, sir. It's an acquired Coxa-Vara.
Acquired, or you can consider Tom Smith arthritis also.
Yes, sir. Septic arthritis sequelae, Tom Smith arthritis sequelae. Yes, because
Dr. Kamal,
yes, sir.
Coxa-Vara you cannot tell just by the gait alone. That is also important to understand.
So,
yeah,
what
so
can be?
I'll give
what
them
will
the
be the anatomical diagnosis
later on.
here, sir?
It's whether it is a stable hip or an unstable hip. That's what is, whether it's a stable gait or an unstable gait. That's what you can conclude by seeing the gait.
And probably the other thing you should, like Dr. Vidyasagar pointed out, it's most important to find out first, is it painful or painless? Because once you decide it's painful gait, then your differential diagnosis varies between different conditions to painless gait, which makes it very safe to conclude certain things. So I think the most important thing first and foremost is you should rule out, is it painful or painless? And if it's painless, what are the other types of gait that the child has, like a Trendelenburg in this condition, right? So I think like Dr. Vidyasagar pointed out, pain, presence of pain and absence of pain are very, very important to be made out in the gait.
Yes.
So can I proceed for the examination findings?
Yeah, go ahead.
So on inspection, the child has a lumbar lordosis from the lateral side on standing. There is a asymmetry in gluteal folds. I think the vascular sign of Narath is positive here. And there is swelling in the gluteal area, which I could make out, and there was transmitted movement with the femur. The shortening is 3 centimeters. There is about 25 degrees FFD. Abduction is limited. The rotations are exaggerated. Alice sign is positive, and telescopy also is positive in this case. So now the PGs, can they explain their diagnosis and why do they think that is the diagnosis?
Yeah, we can ask Dr. Madhukar Biradar. Are you online? Dr. Madhukar?
Dr. Madhu?
Yeah, he's
yes,
speaking.
Sir. It's DDH, sir.
Why do you think so?
Sir, vascular sign of Narath is positive, means the vascular femoral artery could not be palpable, means the supporting humeral head is dislocated, means it's not in the place. Second thing is abduction is limited and the rotations are exaggerated. Telescopic test is positive, means the head is not in the place of the acetabulum. These all suggestive of the DDH.
All these are suggestive of dislocated hip, not necessarily.
Dislocated.
Yeah, it could be a post-septic dislocation also, right?
Yeah, the features are suggestive of a pathological dislocation of the hip, probably, with a history of a septic hip which has been drained. Now, if abduction is limited, rotations are exaggerated, which is not a classical feature of a DDH, right? So I think keeping in view the presence of a swelling in the posterior aspect, which is in favor of a DDH, but with the history of a drainage of the hip joint, I think a pathological dislocation is the one which you have to keep in mind. So it's a dislocation, but it's probably pathological following a sepsis.
Yeah. So Gopti sir, I think that's why it is important to match the history findings with the examination finding. If something is not matching of what you have taken in history and it is not matching with your clinical finding, you have to go back to where it was matching and then proceed the stepwise examination. Then you will not be wrong. So this is the X-ray of the child. One of the person who is online,
Dr. Madhukar, now you can read the X-ray for us.
Yeah.
Yes, sir. This is the X-ray of pelvis with both hips, of a skeletally immature child person. It shows drawing the H line and the vertical and horizontal line. It shows the femoral head is moved in the supero-lateral direction. It confirms the diagnosis of DDS, sir. And also
Okay.
the CE angle is increased and the acetabular index is also increased. And the Shenton line is also broken, sir.
Okay. Anything else?
So the acetabular concavity, the distorted means.
So, okay, you have mentioned that the hip is dislocated. You have mentioned that the acetabulum is steep. You also mentioned that there is a broken Shenton line. Anything else where the head is aligned now? Can you comment on that?
Sir, head is superiorly migrated along pseudo acetabulum is shown superiorly.
Okay. Can you see the teardrop both the sides easily? Teardrop represents the acetabular development. So
Right-sided could be seen, sir, clearly. Left-sided could not be differentiated.
So when you have this thing, I think you should appreciate that the head is out. You should be able to draw the Shenton line, which is from the medial inferior femoral neck, continuous with the superior pubic rami inferior border, and you should look for break or elongated Shenton line. You should draw these two lines. H line, I remember H is Herzenberg or Hilgenriner or horizontal line. That's how I remember H. And then that is through the transverse, the triradiate cartilage on both the sides. The Perkin line is at the edge of the bony acetabulum, wherever you are seeing. So normally the head lies in the infero-medial quadrant. When the head is not ossified also, the medial metaphysis of the neck should be there in that quadrant. And there is one new classification where one bisector is there in the outer and lateral quadrant, and then they have classified one more grade there. This is the acetabular index. So left side is high, and that's the pseudo acetabulum. Our Sadhgurus, is there anything else I am missing out here?
Well, the head capital epiphysis is reasonably well developed.
Yes.
As compared to a person, and if you look at the bony margins of the acetabulum, is suggestive of a irregularity, which major features probably suggest that it was surgically, some surgery was done in the hip joint. And I'm not able to see the triradiate cartilage well in whether there's a premature closure or not, because there seems to be some bony changes in the triradiate cartilage as well. So probably, yes, I would still think that more than a DDH, it is most probably a pathological dislocation of the hip.
So in a younger child, the other signs of DDH will be a unossified head or a delayed ossified head or a smaller size
Delayed
head.
ossification.
Yes.
Yeah. But it's also unusual for a septic hip, because in case of septic hip, we do not expect such a well-formed epiphysis.
That is
in case of post-septic dislocations also, we do not see such well-formed epiphysis and so well-formed, well-retained architecture of the head.
So some deformity is expected in the proximal.
Yeah, some coxa magna is expected.
Okay. All right, sir. With your permission, can I go for the next slide?
Go ahead.
I think that is the teardrop. It's not so well formed. So we have a 5-year-old boy who had a trivial trauma, limping since 4 to 5 months, has a Trendelenburg gait, and on inspection, the child has quadriceps wasting. There is joint line tenderness. There is thirst tenderness, and trochanters at the same level. There is no limb length discrepancy. There is no fixed deformity. Abduction, there is limitation, but there is no fixed deformity. Abduction is only 20 degrees, which is usually about 40-45 degrees. And then log roll is positive. And history-wise, nothing else is significant. So if our PGs can see and collaborate the age with the findings and come to some conclusion that what it could be probably.
Dr. Shekhar Anantu, are you online?
Dr. Shekhar.
Dr. Shekhar Anantu.
Shekhar is our PG here in Sunshine.
Sir,
Shekhar,
hello, sir.
what do you think these findings match into? Have you seen the things? History of trivial
yes, sir.
trauma, limping since 4 to 5 months. There is a tremendous gait, but child has a painless limp as of now. But on inspection, you can see quadriceps wasting. There is some joint line tenderness, and there is thirst tenderness on the trochanter. There is no shortening, trochanters at same level, and there is no fixed deformity. Only abduction limitation is there, which is about 20 degrees, and log roll is positive. Telescopy is negative. Vascular sign of Narath also negative.
So what do you think?
What do you think considering the history and age?
Okay, go ahead, Vidya.
Okay, so this child is most likely fits into Perthes group, where the telescopy is negative and abduction limitation is there, and as a early Perthes. This is the X-ray finding. Shekhar, can you read the
Basically, you
X-ray?
mean to say that the findings are suggestive of a synovitis?
Yes.
Probably due to early stage of Perthes, or
yes, because there is no much deformity or shortening here.
Yes, now, one finding which is very important in Perthes is the abduction inflection of the hip. See, that is one thing which is we don't normally do in adults much. We do an abduction with the hip inflection 90 degrees, which is basically done more in children than in adults. And that finding is very classically seen in Perthes. It's limited in Perthes and in dislocations of the hip, abduction inflection. So I think that's one movement which needs to be looked into whenever you're looking for movements in children of the hip.
Do we rotate the hips here, or just the hips are neutral, sir?
We flex the hip and then abduct the hip at 90 degrees of flexion. So that is very classically seen that there is limitation of abduction in both DDH as well as Perthes. So I think that is something which is important to be added upon whenever you do the physical examination of movements.
Anil sir, you want to add anything?
I agree with Dr. Gopi. It's an important sign.
Okay. Yeah. So, Shekhar, can you read the X-ray here?
This is the immature skeleton of pelvis, both its X-ray of AP view. The left side.
Which side is pathologic, do you think? Okay, I'll give you a frog leg.
Left side, sir. Yes, sir. Both, sir. Bilateral, sir.
Bilateral.
Yes. Sir, right side is more, sir. Actually, that sclerotic edges also there, sir. And capital femoral epiphysis is smaller than left side.
Yeah, Dr. Shekhar, this is the typical example of not digging your own grave in the exams. So, if the examiner asks something misleading you, then you say that there is a bilateral pathology. You should be look at the X-rays and see what you see there. You can't imagine things and say, and this is a problem with all the students. Typically, they dig their own grave.
So I'll just give you one clue again here. The left hip is normal on examination. There is only right hip which seems to be having those findings.
Yeah, so that is the importance of history, right? Your history and examination, all through the history and examination, the left hip is normal, and while coming to the X-ray, you are saying that the pathology is bilateral, so which doesn't make any sense. So for all the postgraduates, you should always remember to correlate the findings, which Dr. Vidyasagar, from the beginning throughout his lecture, he stressed upon.
Yeah, if things are not matching, you go one step back and then where they were matching and then proceed further. That's the way. Otherwise, it will be misleading. So, anybody else can read the X-rays? Any other PGs? There is frog leg here and there is AP view.
So it is the AP view of pelvis in a skeletal immature patient, showing in the right hip joint, the medial space is increased. That is space between the capital femoral epiphysis and the teardrop is more. There is a radiolucency in the medial edge of the metaphysis.
Yeah,
And
it's
the
in the
neck is broad.
metaphysis or in the epiphysis. I think both
So in
areas
the
there is some. No?
metaphysis just below the fascial plate. In the
There on
metaphysis
the
just below the fascial plate, one radiolucency is seen, sir.
it's there on the other side also, normal side also. That is because the acetabulum is not overlapping there. Anything
Horizontal physis is there, sir, and there is some gap joint space is increased on the medial side, sir, and
joint space
there
is
is
increased. Agreed.
and
Height
there is a
of the
horizontal
capital
physis.
femoral
There
epiphysis.
is a sclerosis of the epiphysis is present, sir, and there is a cystic lesion present in the medial aspect of the head epiphysis is present. Cystic lesion.
Yeah,
And
so
hip joint appears to be some erosions are present. Acetabulum appears to be slightly erosed, sir, but I was not able to confirm
why do you say
when
erosion?
compared to the.
It's
It
not
is
fully ossified
some
yet, no?
yes, sir.
5
Some
year old.
fluffy fluffiness is dorsal appears to be fluffy, sir.
So whatever you said, we agree that there is a medial increased joint space, and then
Yes,
probably you told there is some lytic area in the capital femoral epiphysis medially and laterally, and there is increased sclerosis. Correct?
Yes, sir. Yes,
And somebody mentioned about collapse of the height also.
yes, height is also decreased.
Yeah. Anything else?
So in the metaphysis, the lateral margin of the metaphysis, there is rounding of the lateral edge of the metaphysis.
You think it is rounding? Gopinath sir.
Yeah.
The line of
I think there's a flattening of the epiphysis on the lateral side. In addition to the other findings that you already said, there is sclerosis, there is a laterally pushed, the epiphysis is pushed laterally, and the flattening of the lateral portion of the epiphysis. That is why the joint space appears to be increased on the lateral side of the hip joint. That is because of the flattening of the epiphysis. There is some degree of extrusion which is just beginning to happen. If you draw a line, the Perkins line, you'll find that the head is just trying to extrude laterally. So I would think there are metaphyseal changes, there are epiphyseal changes. So it's very important in Perthes disease that you see not only the AP view, you should also see the frog lateral view before you decide on your comments. Now here it is classically seen that the flattening is there in the epiphysis as well. So the head of the epiphysis is deformed there. Of course, you're not seeing much of metaphyseal changes here. You are seeing that the entire capital epiphysis is involved. So these are the things which you are to take up from there. That is one, what is the pathological stage of the disease? Whether it's a stage of avascular necrosis, is this a stage of early fragmentation or late fragmentation, etc. Second thing you should see is the extent of the disease. Is the disease extending through the entire capital epiphysis or part of the capital epiphysis is involved? That is where earlier used to use the Cattrall classification, and now we use the lateral pillar classification. Now, because the Cattrall classification is the inter-observer and intra-observer error is quite high, so we are not doing that, and that comes early in the stage of the disease. Whereas in the stage of early fragmentation, when you can intervene in the condition, that is when the lateral pillar classification comes into the picture. So at that stage, you should use the lateral pillar classification. Now it's a stage of avascular necrosis, and that time this classification doesn't come into the picture. Only when the early fragmentation starts, that is the time when you should put the lateral pillar classification. Now here there is a flattening of the capital epiphysis. There is the entire epiphysis is involved in the condition. Yeah.
Yeah. So there are three classifications mentioned. That is the Salter-Thompson, which is based on the presence of the fracture line, subchondral fracture line, which is seen in only 30% of the cases, and it's very early. So that's why again it could not be there. But this is stage of avascular necrosis. So Salter-Thompson can be applied in the early stage, provided you get that fracture line, whether it's more than 50% or less than 50%. Hitesh sir, that lytic area just above the physis, can you call that a fracture line? Hitesh
Hitesh
sir.
is not online, I think.
Yeah, I am online. I can hear that all the discussion. Actually, the lytic area generally it started having from the fragmentation. It is not having any fragmentation, so it is a fracture. It is not the. It's what you said is correct. Salter and Thompson on that. So it's not about the lytic area. We can't describe that. Somebody describe on epiphysis is the lytic area. It is not lysis. Okay, it's a stage 1. And in the frog lateral shows very nicely Salter and Thompson the classification. You can see the subchondral line. You can go on the yes. You can see from the lateral, it goes on that, and you rightly mention it is present in 30% of cases. Another aspect we can see in X-ray is the medial joint space. If you see the medial joint space, it would be the widen, and what the Gopinath sir has said that it is that early sign it will start extruding.
Yeah. Okay. I think the new PG should read the modified Elizabethtown classification, which is based on the Waldenstorm's radiological classification, which is important and the current trend which we are using other than the routine Cattrall, Salter-Thompson and lateral pillar classification. And I think we'll go on for the next case.
Stage 1B, sir.
Yeah, you are right. Why do you say 1B and one not 1A?
Because there is flattening of the epiphysis is present on the lateral view, sir.
Correct. AVN without collapse, stage 1A, with collapse 1B. And then fragmentation A and B depending upon 2 fissure line and more than 2 fissure line. And 3 is healing, 1/3 and more than 1/3 healing or newborn formation. That's the classification. So we'll
Vidya,
go on. Sir?
Before going on to the next case, do you have any questions on the WhatsApp which you can answer now? Because we are already more than an hour into the session.
I think WhatsApp, there is no question, sir. I have not got any question.
Yeah, okay. Go ahead with the next.
Yeah. So we'll go to the next and last case. A 12-year-old boy who has a history of trivial slip in the bathroom about 2 months back, and he has a pain and limp since 2 months. The child has antalgic gait now. I think we have seen this child walking before.
Yeah.
Right. So this is the child who's I'm talking about. So we have seen this gait. I think already described the gait also. Anything else we didn't describe in his morphological features?
Yeah.
Adipogenital.
Yeah, so the child is a little bit on the heavier side for his age, right? Yeah, I don't know whether to call it obese, but the BMI is definitely higher end. And then this is the one of the examination finding. I am examining the normal side. So please, any of the PGs tell me what is that? Can you describe that examination?
Axis deviation.
So what is happening? What is axis deviation?
Sir, it is a sign of external rotation deformity.
Yeah, who's speaking? Jagani.
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
Yes, sir. Axis deviation is indicative of the rotation deformity. Whenever there is a external rotation deformity in the hip, when we flex the knee, it will
Does that mean that is
to
axis deviation or
same side.
something else?
Due to flexion, whenever we
It's
try to
sectoral
flex the
bend.
hip, sir, there is a deviation of the hip towards the opposite towards the same side axilla, sir, and rather than going towards the opposite axilla. That is the axis
So we
deviation.
call it as obligatory external rotation, right?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. It's obligatory external rotation.
So the hip
Uh,
doesn't flex further unless the hip is external rotating. That's a obligatory external rotation.
Okay.
So what does this suggest? What do you interpret from that?
The
What do you interpret if you get such a movement?
some point.
The superolateral aspect of the head edge deformed.
Okay. So there is some deformation in the femoral head neck junction.
Superolateral.
What is this sign called as? Kamal Parida?
Differential rotation.
What is the name of this
Knee
sign?
axillaris. Knee axillaris. Okay, sir.
It's
The
called
sign
as
is
Brenham sign.
Okay.
Brenham sign.
Brenham sign.
Yes.
Yeah, go ahead, Vidya.
Okay. So on inspection, he is
Let-
obese
one-
child.
Excuse me, Vidya.
Sir,
Can
sir.
I make a comment?
Sure, sir.
Yeah. Now, see, one thing you should know that whenever you do an examination, especially of a long case, a general examination of the patient is as important as the local examination of the patient. Although we have been dealing with the hip examination, and Dr. Vidyasagar has comprehensively discussed it. General examination is very important. And another thing in general examination, which we normally expect whenever you examine a child, is the presence or absence of generalized ligamentous laxity, one, and a Tanner scoring, especially in an adolescent child. So in the exam, you will be expected to tell us about the Tanner score in an adolescent child. So a Tanner scoring is very important, and especially now, and if this condition, which apparently looks like in this child, a Tanner scoring is very important. So these two things you should always look for in a pediatric child whenever you do a hip examination.
Yeah, thank you, sir. I think these 2 points should be included here. And other than that, the inspectory findings show obese child, right side pelvis is higher, palpation, the right trochanter is higher, more prominent. Femoral pulse is well felt on both the sides. There is supratrochanteric shortening of 2 centimeter. There is Brennan signs positive, external rotation deformity, which is fixed, and limited flexion, which is noted. So, what could be the probable diagnosis in this child?
But probably one sign which is also important in this condition is the
Yes,
degree
sir.
of extension. It's not only the restriction of flexion which is important. What is also important is the degree of extension.
Extension.
If
Okay.
the flexion is restricted and the extension is also increased, because it suggests that the arc of movement is altered, then it helps you differentiate from an arthritic condition. So whenever you have a limitation of movements like this, especially flexion, then you should see if the extension is restricted or not. If the extension is exaggerated, it is more in favor of a slip capital epiphysis. If the extension is restricted, then it suggests that the joint is involved due to something else. Or at least even if it's a slip capital epiphysis, it is a slip capital epiphysis with complications like chondrolysis, etc. So the
Even,
extension, looking for extension is
in
very
adult-
important
adult-
in this condition. Yeah.
Yes.
So this is what sir and me are discussing is a classic presentation. Any complicated thing like chondrolysis, avascular necrosis will further change the findings. So you should know to include those findings also in this whenever they present with that. So keep in mind the classical finding and deviate when you think something is not fitting right. And then okay. This is the X-ray of the child, same child. Now, who is there, PG?
Kamal Parida, you can read, man.
Kamal, yes. Can you read the X-rays?
Yes, sir. This is an pelvis with both hip with of an immature skeleton, showing right side right side slipped capitofemoral physis feature, like the short neck is there, the head is epiphysis metaphysis junction is slipped upward and laterally, and the great trochanter is migrated upward. There is coxa breva, and the epiphysis is the joint space is maintained, joint is congruent, but the metaphysis is moved upward. It's more likely suggestive of or the line of plane also passing above the acetabulum. So its Treth1 sign is positive. So most likely the diagnosis is slipped capitofemoral epiphysis, and then we have to tell the grade, what is the grade of the slip.
Yeah. So most of the examiners like if you describe the findings and then say they are fitting into this, so I give this diagnosis.
Yes,
So when you
yes.
see X-ray, don't say right away that it is SCFE. You describe the findings so that the examiner knows that you understand the thing well. Then you can, everything matches with SCFE, you can tell. So I will describe the signs here again. So that's the capital femoral epiphysis, and actually you all should know it's a misnomer. The head is there in the acetabulum, it's the neck which slips upwards and anteriorly, and that's the clean line, which is a line drawn along the lateral cortex. It should cut a part of the capital femoral epiphysis, and you can see on the affected side it's absolutely not touching the head, so that is one of the subtle signs of slip. And if you observe, the physis widening is there. Can you see the physeal line on left and right and see? So it's a very subtle sign in early pre-slip maybe, but here you can see that physeal widening also. And then you can see the overlap between the head and the metaphysis, which is blanches out, and that's a steel sign which is seen as a hyperintense area because of the overlap. And the last sign is normally on the left side, if you see the femoral neck metaphysis medial side overlaps with the posterior acetabulum, and it is slightly more dense, and it's not there on the right side because of the upward and outward movement of the neck. So that's a sham sign. And you should know how to measure a Southwick angle. You should draw a straight line along the shaft of the femur, and you should draw another line which is perpendicular to the capital femoral epiphysis and intersecting the first line, and that angle in anteroposterior view and the frog leg lateral is called a Southwick angle. And you should never ask for a frog leg view first of all. In case of SCFE, you should always ask for a cross table lateral view so that you don't cause further damage. Anil sir, Gopi sir,
Yeah.
can you enlighten us more, sir?
Yeah, I think the most important investigation in a slip capital epiphysis is the lateral view of the hip joint. So whenever you see the AP view, of course, you should always ask for the lateral view also. And like Dr. Vidyasagar rightly told, it should be a cross-tribal lateral rather than a frog lateral most of the time. Yeah. So all the other signs are, of course, like Dr. Vidyasagar had said.
You should be careful in early sleep. You should be very careful in early sleep.
So if you see any irregularity or widening of the physis when compared to the other side, that could be an early pre-slip sign, which is little difficult. The next would be to get a clean line which is there, but it is seen only once the hip joint, the epiphysis slips.
Yeah, it is. The epiphyseal line is hazy and widened, which is classically seen for a pre-slip. Yeah.
Yes. And one of the PG had mentioned that the joint line is there, the space is maintained. I think that is important. If there is a complication like chondrolysis hip, then the space would be less.
Absolutely, absolutely. We should understand here the pathology is not between the epiphysis and the acetabulum. The pathology is between the metaphysis and the epiphysis. So actually, we are not dealing with the hip joint per se. We are dealing with the femur. So it's a disease of the upper end of the femur rather than the hip joint per se. The epiphysis does not move out of place. It's the metaphysis which moves out of place. So that is very important for us to understand. The problem pathology lies between the metaphysis and the epiphysis, and not between the epiphysis and the hip acetabular. I think that's important.
Yeah. So in systemic examination, here you should look for general fever, apprehension, stature, where you think it is a syndrome. Weight and BMI is important for SCFE, swelling elsewhere like in exostosis or juvenile rheumatoid arthritis. In case you find asymmetry in stature, upper segment, lower segment ratio, arm span are the other additional tests. Chest expansion in spondyloarthropathy in the older kids can be done, and abdomen and chest in tuberculosis. Always look for regional lymph nodes and describe the neurovascular deficits. I think that should complete. I don't know, people insist the per rectal examination now, or there is anything valid mentioning it or not.
Especially now here in this patient, the endocrinological examination. Here's where in this
Tanner
patient,
score,
the Tanner score is very important for us to know, especially if there are endocrinological problems like hypogonadism or any other endocrinological problem. So that is why Tanner scoring is important whenever you do a general examination of the patient. And generalized ligamentous laxity. These are the two things I think you should add on to your adult examination, which you will do in a child.
Yes, sir. And I have just mentioned briefly age-wise what you should suspect. Infant, septic hip, DDH, congenital conditions like PFFD or Coxa-Vara, 1 to 5 years synovitis, early Perthes, DDH, and very rarely leukemias can present, because less than 5 years leukemia is also common, and most of the times I think that should be kept in mind, malignancies. 5 to 10 years, Perthes hip, seronegative arthritis, reactive synovitis. In adolescent age group, SCFE and chondrolysis, osteoblastoma, or a stress fracture of the neck is a possibility. And at any age, you can get septic arthritis, though it is common in less than 5. And then osteomyelitis, juvenile rheumatoid arthritis, fracture neck of femur.
One thing in the fracture neck of femur, it should be known that it's a high velocity injury in a child, usually.
Yeah.
Unlike that of an adult, the injury is reasonably high velocity injury. If the velocity of injury is low, then you will have to think probably there's a pathological status there. So you should not be very, if the velocity of the injury is not very high, then fracture neck femur in a normal bone is unlikely in a child.
Yes, sir.
Dr. Vidya, I would also like to clarify one thing to the PGs.
Yes,
that
sir.
they are using the term Thomson arthritis with septic arthritis almost interchangeably. They should understand that Tom Smith represents a sequelae of a hip, and most of them, the infection has occurred during the infancy. And when Tom Smith described them way back in 18th century, less than half of them were drained. So this is a condition in which there is a loss of head and neck in the in a neonate, and the discovery is made several years later. So Thomson arthritis is not equivalent to a septic arthritis of hip. It is always
you're absolutely right, sir.
And in the exam, it's very unlikely that you will get an acute septic hip.
Yeah.
Let me tell you one thing. It's very unlikely that the examiner will give you a case of an acute septic hip for a clinical examination. So I think as far as the exam goes, acute septic hip is very unlikely to be given for the exam.
It's a very painful condition.
Yeah, very painful, and it's because the surgeon would always like to operate on that child. So rather than keep the child for the exam. So it's very unlikely that you'll have an acute septic hip. Yeah.
So this would be the take-home message. Present the positive findings first when in history, and make a differential diagnosis to at least by the time you are at the end of the history. And everything you take in history should be relevant to your presentation and the age of the child. And then once you make those diagnoses mentally, you should do the inspection findings and then confirm them in palpation. Overall measurements must match. The apparent, true, everything must match, plus or minus. It's mathematics. If it doesn't match, you have to go back, somewhere you're wrong. And then while making the diagnosis, after the inspection and palpation, you should have a mental picture of what the X-ray looks like when the you should not be surprised when the examiner keeps the X-ray and asks you to describe the finding. By that time, you should have a mental picture. Okay, this I am expecting in the X-ray, and you should be ready to have at least 2 diagnoses at that point of time. I think my presentation is over. Our Sadhgurus want to add anything?
Yeah,
Sir?
one thing I would like to add in the Trendelenburg test, don't be misled by the child showing too much on one side. It's not a negative test then. If
Yeah, so
the
in those
child
cases-
lifts the hip by tilting the shoulder or pelvis too much, swaying on one side, it's not a positive Trendelenburg. That's not a negative Trendelenburg, sorry.
Okay, you mean to say that it is positive? Yeah, it's still positive.
Yeah.
So can we support the child shoulder, sir? I think it is described also.
Yeah.
Assisted
In
Trendelenburg, do they call that?
You can even do if you suspect that the child is probably having a borderline Trendelenburg positive, you can do a stressed Trendelenburg positive also. You can actually put pressure on the shoulder and ask the child to do the Trendelenburg. So if the abductor muscles are not functioning well, then the Trendelenburg becomes positive after some time. Or you can do a delayed Trendelenburg. You can wait for some time and the muscle gets fatigued and the pelvis starts dropping. So these are two types you can add on to the Trendelenburg. One is a stress Trendelenburg and one is a delayed Trendelenburg. If you wait for 10 to 15 seconds or 20 seconds more, then if the muscles are getting fatigued, they are not as normal as the other side, the pelvis will start dropping. Or you can put pressure on the shoulder of the disease side and you find that it is the unsupported side, and you will find the pelvis starts to drop. So that's a stress test also. So both things you can add on whenever you think you are not too sure that the Trendelenburg is positive or not.
Anil sir, Gopi sir, the examination pattern which I mentioned, do you think it is acceptable in the current era?
Yeah, I think your presentation of starting with gait, then I think your general examination also is also important. I would include general examination as a part of the long case, definitely. So your history, gait, general examination of the patient. Then when you come to the local examination of the patient, you will do like you rightly said, the inspection, palpation, movements, measurements, neurological status, vascular status, regional lymph nodes. Then you would always examine the opposite hip. You'll always examine the spine and the knee joint. Also remember that many times the presentation might be of pain in the knee. Don't forget to examine the hip. So, and occasionally you might have a spinal pathology, a lumbosacral disease, maybe tuberculosis infection, which presents as though the patient has got a hip disease. The other thing that I would like to always, during your palpation is, you should also palpate the iliac crest. Sometimes tumors of the iliac crest, like Ewing's, etc., which might be there in a child, might present as a hip disorder. So you should look for that. And whenever you're looking at the posterior suprailiac spine for a Trendelenburg, it is difficult for you to notice it because the posterior suprailiac spine is so close to the midline of the body. It is very difficult to see if there is a drop or not. So if you want to see a drop of the pelvis, if you look at the bony pelvis or look at the antesuprailiac spine, which is away from the midline, which gives you a better degree of magnitude as far as the drop is concerned. So assessment is much better that way. That is why we don't use the posterior suprailiac spine so often in these children. And of course, when you do a Stahel's test for a fixed flexion deformity, it is like Dr. Vidyasagar was saying, it's difficult to handle the child. In fact, I think it's easier to handle a smaller child than a larger child, because with a child hanging on the edge of the couch, it's very difficult for the examiner to handle the child. So it's easier. But the Stahel's test is much more useful in neuromuscular conditions, especially cerebral palsy. So when you're examining a child with a cerebral palsy,
You mean to say
doing a
Thomas test?
Yeah, Stahel's test. A Thomas test is more, a Stahel's test is a little more useful whenever you're doing a child looking for fixed flexion deformity in a cerebral palsy. Of course, Thomas test is always done for all these conditions. And you also mentioned about the torsion of the limb. You also mentioned about the femoral torsion. You also mentioned about the tibial torsion and the foot torsion. Whenever there is a foot problem, then you should always look at the medial and lateral epiphyseal malleolar line for the degree of rotation. Because if there's a foot problem, you should not draw the thigh foot angle. If the foot is deformed due to whatever condition, maybe a club foot or maybe a metatarsus adductus condition, you should not draw the thigh foot angle. Then you should look at the thigh and the transmalleolar axis of the ankle for your degree of rotation. So torsion, whenever you look for torsion, you should look for that. Otherwise, I think Vidyasagar has actually covered the entire range of the examination.
Okay, Anil sir, anything else?
Sir, I would also suggest the PGs to be ready with a plan after they have examined the case. They should be ready with a plan of further investigation. Most PGs hesitate after completing the examination. They should have a whatever disease, whatever differential diagnosis they have formed, they should be ready with the plan of examination and a tentative plan. What you have already mentioned, what they would expect in an X-ray and further treatment. Usually, after completing this part of the Viva goes somewhere hayway because of this thing, because they don't know how to proceed further. So after examination is complete, they should have in mind what is the further plan of action. They should at least skip 2 or 3 differential diagnoses and plan their investigation and treatment planning according. They should have that in mind.
Okay.
Right. So if there are no, I think we have come to the end of this first inaugural session of POSI Gurukul. On behalf of POSI, I would like to sincerely thank our Guru today, Dr. Vidyasagar, and our Sadgurus, Dr. Gopinath Menon and Dr. Anil Agarwal.
Thank you, sir.
And Dr. Dhiren, are you online? The POSI president?
Yes, I'm online. Yes, I'm online. The only thing is like my video is not working. So thank you very much, Sadgurus and Gurus and Venkatadas for like doing a wonderful job. And again, a special thanks to our postgraduate. And I am sure that this will be definitely helpful to them. And I also request them to send their suggestions and feedback so that definitely we can improve upon during the next program. So once again, thank you very much and good night.